You may be seated. Our scripture today is found in the book of Matthew chapter 25. And we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 13. This particular passage actually comes in the middle of one of the bigger sermons that we have from Jesus. We have two major sermons that we have pretty much what we think we have the full sermon. The first being the Sermon on the Mount, which we find in Matthew 7, going for quite a ways, a couple of chapters. And then you get this sermon, which we call the Olivet Discourse. All right, which starts actually back in Matthew chapter 24 and goes for a little while. And the Olivet Discourse is an interesting one because it is about end times. All right, and lots of people, they get really fascinated with end times. They really want to understand it. And so this parable that we're looking at today actually comes in the midst of this discussion about what to be expected. Okay? And this is the second parable, and it's like, I skipped the first one, and we might get back to the first one, but the first one essentially says something very similar to what we're about to talk about. But I want you to have that information because it's somewhat pertinent to what the parable is about. So if you're there in Matthew chapter 25, we'll start with verse 1. And at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise, however, took oil in jars, along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him!" Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both of us, and you instead go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Sir, sir," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." And so the main thrust of this passage really comes in that last bit. Remember, parables, we know about as much about the parables as Christ tells us about them. And this is his interpretation of this parable. Real simple. Right? Keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. The one just before this that we skipped, he relates it to servants serving. Right? And that they should be serving when their master comes back. Right? And if they aren't, the master's going to be kind of a little annoyed and they'll be kicked out, right? This message keeps coming up, There are those who will be ready and those who will not. Those who will be doing what they're supposed to be doing and those who won't. And so we want to be ready. We want to be ready for this coming. Right? So one of the things to note about this is that because it is in the Olivet Discourse, we have this understanding that in the beginning of the Olivet Discourse, Jesus actually gives us signs. The signs of the end times. And the signs are like there'll be wars and rumors of wars. You know what? There are wars right now, right? And rumors of wars. And there will be earthquakes and the weather will be kind of odd and do bad things. Well, there are earthquakes and the weather does bad things. Yesterday I was snow blowing and I slipped on the ice. Hurt myself pretty good, right? Weather doesn't do what we want it to do. It storms when you don't want it to storm, and it doesn't snow when you want it to snow. And yes, we live in New York, so I expect it to snow, right? all of my cross-country skiers. You know, when Daniel was 5, we bought him skis to go, and we haven't really had a good winter since then for him to go skiing. We live in New York, he should be able to go skiing. The weather's wacky. The people are bad. Wars are happening. You know, all of those signs, honestly, all of those signs have been happening now for 2,000 years. Right? In fact, if you were to ask certain sects of Christianity, the second coming has happened back in 70 AD. All right, all those signs were just meant for that time, and that's it. Sort of it. Well, if that were the case, then the rest of this Olivet Discourse really obsolete. This parable obsolete, right? Because if he's already come back, we don't need to watch anymore. He's here. Well, Paul writes in the book of Thessalonians, he's like, no, it didn't happen yet. Keep your eyes open. Keep waiting. Keep watching. It's going to happen. And so that's what this parable is about. Keep watching because it's going to happen. So let's break down the parable a little bit. You know, he uses the illustration here of a wedding feast. This parable is not found in any of the other books. The closest thing to this parable found in another book is in the book of Luke. All right, and if I can find my bulletin. Luke chapter 12 has something similar, right? He says, lestwise, or let your waist be girded and your lamps burning. You know, here the virgins needed to have it so that their lamps could be burning, right? And you yourselves be like men who wait for their masters when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately. Right? But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Right? So, again, you got to be ready. But let's break this down. We have the master who's coming, the bridegroom. Well, the bridegroom, that's an easy one to pick out. We know who the bridegroom is. Jesus is the bridegroom. For our evening devotions in the family, right now we're kind of going through the book of John. And last night, it just happened to coincide. We were in John, where John says he's the bridegroom. You know, and the friends of the bridegroom, they rejoice when the bridegroom shows up. Right? Jesus was the bridegroom. If we go back to the Song of Solomon, that kind of risque book in the Old Testament, it talks about Jesus being the bridegroom. God is the bridegroom. Right? And when he comes, it's part of the wedding. Now, to really understand this parable to some extent and to understand that Luke passage, we need to understand how a wedding takes place. Right? The custom of their weddings at that time. It's an interesting custom. I kind of like it. Right? Of course, if we had that custom, I don't think Sarah and I ever would have gotten married. So, the beginning of a wedding in this time starts with this. The parents of the bride, the parents of the groom, or sometimes just the groom, so the father of the bride, the father of the groom, or the groom, get together and they kind of arrange the marriage. All right? And there may be some money changing hands or something. Right? They arrange the marriage. All right? Now the bride and the groom, they kind of have to go along with, according to tradition, they go along with their parents, and they actually exchange vows. And then after they exchange vows, they don't finish the marriage. The marriage now is going to take a year or two before it gets finished. Right? In which the bridegroom will go away. The bride stays at her father's house until the bridegroom comes back for her. The bridegroom, while he goes away, he goes off and he builds a place for his bridegroom or his bride. Yeah, he doesn't build a place for his bridegroom. That's not in the Bible. That's kind of against the Bible. All right. He goes to prepare a place for his bride. Either he builds a house for the two of them to live in on their own, or he builds an addition onto his parents' house. And my wife is very glad that we did not build an addition onto my parents' house. Okay? We like our space. We love my parents. They're great people. But I don't want to live with her parents. She doesn't want to live with my parents. And neither of us actually want to live with our own parents either. So, but he goes, he prepares a place. You know what? We see this in John chapter 14, don't we? John chapter 14, Jesus says to the disciples, I go to prepare a place for you. And then I'll come back. Right? I'll come back to get you. This is about that wedding there. That wedding. So Jesus is gone. He's preparing a place for us. And you know, it's been 2,000 years, so it's going to be a wonderful place. You know, we can build a house in, how long did it take to build your garage? 3 days? 3 days to build a garage, right? Jesus taking 2,000 years, and you know, he built the earth in 7 days. So imagine the place that he's preparing for us. But so the bridegroom goes off, he prepares the place for us, and then he kind of gives an announcement that he's coming back, right? These are those signs, right? So when we are aware that he's coming back, the bride has her bridesmaids, that would be these virgins here, that they gather together with her, and they wait for the bridegroom to come. When the bridegroom finally gets back, he takes his bride, and generally this is done at night, and it's done at night so it can be a spectacle kind of a thing, with the torches and the lights, and it can be all pretty and stuff. And the bridegroom, the bridesmaids, and the bridal party, essentially, the men that are assisting the bridegroom, they march from the bride's place, from her father's house, to wherever his house is going, wherever he built their place. Wherever that place he prepared is. And they take the torches and they go through at night, and everybody in the town, everybody in the village kind of come out to see the procession and kind of rejoice. It's the happening thing. Right? And so that's where we are in this Matthew passage. You know, at this point, every parable we've looked at so far has kind of talked about the kingdom of heaven, and it's kind of talked about it in a here and now sort of situation. This one is not in the here and now. Right? This one is in the there and then. Right? At that time, it says in the NIV. The New King James actually just says, then the kingdom of heaven. It means at a later point in time. At the future event, not now. All right? Not now, but at a certain point, Christ is coming back. And we are called to be ready. So we have the bridegroom, Christ, who has gone to prepare a place for us. And then we have the 10 virgins. And you can translate virgins as young women. Right? These were the friends of the bridesmaid, or of the bride. They are the bridesmaids. Right? And so I know when I was younger, I've read this and I kept thinking, okay, so he's getting 10 brides? That seems a little weird because, you know, Jesus said 1 man, 1 woman sort of a thing. That's the way it was from the beginning. So he's not getting 10 brides. All right, this is not the equivalent of the Muslim 70 some odd virgins that you get when you go to heaven if you die in jihad sort of a thing. Doesn't sound like heaven to me. I'm happy with my one wife. And I think if I had more than one wife, my one wife would not be happy. And you know that saying, happy wife, happy life? Well, so let's keep her happy. So no, these aren't 10 brides for him. These are the friends of the bride. All right? And it's interesting that when we look at Scripture, the church is depicted as many different things. You know, we are depicted as the bride of Christ. It's also interesting that Israel is depicted as the bride of Christ, which is where some people say, hey, Israel and the church, they are the same thing. Others say, hey, the church was grafted into Israel and became the bride. But the reality is that the church is not just described as the bride of Christ, but we're also described as the friends of the bride. We're also described as the witnesses for the marriage feast and the friends of the bridegroom. We get to be all of those things. All of those things at once. And so we have these 10 virgins. 5 of them are wise. 5 of them are foolish. Now, there is no real understanding of what makes these guys wise, what makes these guys foolish, other than the fact that we look and we see that the foolish ones don't have oil and the wise ones do. The foolish ones are unprepared for the bridegroom to come. The wise ones are prepared. And most of the commentators on this, most of the guys who have really delved into this, they look at this and they say, this is to show you that there are lots of people out there who profess Christianity. They profess to be Christians. You got 5 who are prepared, 5 who aren't. That's a 50-50 chance there, right? One of the guys I was reading said, let's not go into the math of it, because it's not trying to give us a mathematical equation going, all right, there's 20 people here, 10 of you are gone, 10 of you are staying, right? He's not trying to say that. But he's trying to give us this idea that there are going to be a lot of people out there who are claiming to be Christians, who put on that face, who put on that mask, who come to church, who sing with us, who pray with us, who, when the day comes, we may find out that, it was just an act. They may want to do good things, they may want to do all these things, but they don't have that relationship with Christ. And it's interesting, when the bridegroom comes and they're not ready, and they come to the door and they knock, and he goes, look, I tell you the truth, I don't know you. This is for the 5 foolish ones. I don't know you. We see something similar in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 7. There are many, he says, that will knock on the door and say, Master, Master, didn't we do this in your name? Didn't we do that in your name? And he will say, depart from me, ye who work iniquity, for I never knew you. Right? The reality is there are going to be a lot of people who stand there and don't get in. Even though they went to church every Sunday, even though they did good things, but they didn't do it for him. They did it for themselves. Right? Depart from me, I don't know you. And so as we look at this and we have to say, are we prepared? Are we prepared? And a lot of people, they don't like this idea. They don't like this idea that we need to make sure that we're prepared. It's not we need to get saved again. That's not what he's talking about. It's not hey, let's just say the prayer just in case, because that's what a lot of people, that's what this is all about. It's just this fire insurance of, let's do this just in case. No, there's a lot of scripture that actually talks about searching yourself. And I have one in the bulletin for you, 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5. It says, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you? Unless indeed you are disqualified. In other words, we need to search our hearts. Do I do this because, I want fire insurance, or do I do this because I have a love for Christ? There are lots of times we do things because, I have to do it. I love my children, and one of my children, when it's time for art, they do it because they're told, you're going to sit down and you're going to do your art now. All right? You have to do the drawing. Then my other child will sit there and, it's art time, let's do this, let's draw this, and I got this, and Dad, can I do more art, and can I? And then mine freaks out because there's paint on the floor and paint on the table, and even though we got the nice cloth down, because they're so into the art, they're just doing it because they love it. Right? And then you got the other child. Yep, I got something on the paper. That's art. We're good. I'm done. All right? Because you told me I had to. Check yourself. Are you doing these things because you love Christ? Right? Or are you doing them because, that's just what we do on Sunday morning? All right? This is one of those things that I worry about with my own children as they grow up. Is it going to be just every morning we went to church and so now we go to church? Or will they someday be able to say, I go to church because I love Christ? When they get off to college, will they still go to church when they're no longer living in my house? Or will they be part of that? Here's the statistics for children who grow up in the church. 80% never go back to church after they move out of their parents' house. Right? So not 50-50, but 80%. Will they be of that 20% who go, I go to church because I love Christ? Right? And the reality is that I pray that they are prepared. But I can't tell you what my children are, where my children are. I can hope, I can long, but only they and God know. Right? Just like I can't tell you where you are. And you can't tell me where I am. Only I know and God knows where I am. Only you and God know. Because you know what? As much as we can examine your life and go, well, you did this and you did that and you did that, we can do this very external, legalistic examination. But the reality is the examination that needs to take place here is an internal one. And I find oftentimes that that's the difficult part, that internal one. Because you know, the easiest person for me to lie to is myself. And it takes a lot of work to really sit down and realize, do I love Christ? Or do I do this because I feel some obligation? Do I do this because, and I will tell you, when I was in seminary, we were required to witness to people once a week. You had to share the gospel with somebody once a week. Well, the reality was, while I was in seminary, sometimes I didn't see people more than once a week. And the people I saw tended to be people in church and people in seminary. Right? And so I was going out and witnessing to people, but oftentimes it wasn't because, I really had this passion to go witness to the people. It was because, I'm being forced to. Right? And the answer is that's not the way it's supposed to be. Am I telling people about Jesus because, I really love Jesus and I think that people ought to know about Jesus and, or am I telling people about Jesus because, the pastor tells me every Sunday, and every Sunday he gets up there and he says, you ought to tell people about Jesus. We ought to be sharing. We're the ambassadors. It's our job to get the word out. All right? Well, so we have these wise virgins, and we have these foolish virgins. And they've got their lamps. They've got their lights. I can't tell you what the lamps represent. I can tell you that the oil represents being prepared, having Christ in them, right? Being ready for that return. So we got the 5 wise, we got the 5 foolish. And they go and they're waiting. And in verse 5 it says, the bridegroom was a long time in coming. And they all became drowsy and they fell asleep. Right? He was a long time coming. I like the King James Version where it says, he tarried. Right? He tarried. Well, we're 2,000 years into this thing. That's a long time coming. Right? And it's easy to look at this and go, look, they became drowsy and they fell asleep. They became weary and tired and fell asleep. Well, they shouldn't have done that. Well, I'm going to tell you that the disciples who were hearing this didn't have a choice when they fell asleep. Right? When they came in, actually most of them were crucified or stoned or murdered in some way, shape, or form. They fell asleep, guys. They aren't still walking around awake with the living. We can't assign a moral value to this falling asleep here. Some of the commentaries will try to do that. Jesus doesn't do that here. There are other places where it says you need to be alert, awake, and watching, right? But in this particular parable, we can't really assign that moral value because he tarried a long time. We've been praying for a couple of people. We prayed for a couple of people earlier who passed away. This is sleeping in the Bible. This is sleeping. And so, let's not assign a moral value to that. But the reality is that it was a long time. Right? It was a long time. And so at midnight, it says in verse 6, the cry rang out. Well, this midnight actually takes us back to the book of Deuteronomy. No, Exodus. Sorry. Deuteronomy is after Exodus. Exodus, right? You guys know what happened in Exodus? Daniel's favorite holiday happened in Exodus. All right? We call it the Passover. Yeah, I saw it whispered. The Passover happened in Exodus. In Exodus, they were told to take their staffs, to eat with their sandals on their feet, so that they were ready to go at a moment's notice. And it turns out that they were sent out at midnight. Right? The deliverance happened at midnight. When normal people, sane people, go to sleep, are in bed, have been asleep for a while, or they've been woken up by their children who have to pee, or their dogs who have to pee, or their wives who are dealing with the children who have to. Actually, in our house, I deal with the children who have to pee because they're on my side of the bed. But, midnight, the time to sleep. There's a time for sleeping. That's when the bridegroom came. When everybody was like, all right, well, it's not going to be today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. He comes at that time of least expectation. We were watching things happening over in the Ukraine, and I've heard a lot of people go, it's going to be today. See, it's all happening right now. It's going to, you know what? It might not be today, but let's be prepared as though it were today. He's not going to come when we most expect it. He's going to come when we least expect it. But the reality is it could be at any moment's notice. Any moment's notice. And ultimately, that's what this all boils down to. So the virgins, they wake up, they start preparing things, they get back to work, they start doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Right? And the foolish virgins say to the wise virgins, hey, give us some of your oil. This part has baffled me for a while. When they say, give us some of your oil, and they say, no, we don't got it. We don't got enough to share. It baffled me because, I tell you every week, we're supposed to share the gospel, right? We're supposed to share the gospel. Well, guess what? You cannot share. You can share the gospel, you can tell people about Jesus, but ultimately you can't share your salvation. They have to choose it for themselves. They have to actually procure their own salvation. They need to go to Christ themselves. You can tell them all about it. You can say, well, there's a shop right down the street that has the oil, right? But we can't give them our oil because, well, we just can't. It's not ours to give, really. It's the bridegroom's. And so we have the wise ones say, we can't share the oil. You got to do it on your own. You got to have it yourself. The reality is that when people come to meet their Maker, they can't get the oil at that point. And nobody can give them the oil. And so they go out searching for the oil and they can't find it anymore. Because you know what happens at midnight? I was surprised. I grew up in the city areas where things were open till 2 o'clock in the morning. In Buffalo, things were open till 4 o'clock in the morning because that's when the bars closed, because they had to be closed for an hour a day. All right, they closed at 4, they opened at 5. Well, the gas station stayed open so that all the people who were leaving from the bars could go get gas and they could get food and stuff. And the restaurant stayed open. But it turns out, you come out to a place like this, it's not open at midnight. Anything. Nothing's open at midnight. Right? Nothing. I was surprised. I went to Rochester one time. I was dropping a friend off. It was 2 a.m. And I thought, surely things would be open because, Rochester's not that different than Buffalo. Nothing was open. We're like, we need gas. Our car was running out. We need to find a gas station quick. This was before you could type in a GPS and, look for a gas station that was, back in the day, when we were young. We didn't have gas. You can't get it at midnight. Well, the reality is that there's coming a time when the door gets shut. There's coming a time when there is no second chance. When all your chances have been used up. All that time that they spent sleeping, they could have been buying oil. They could have been getting ready because they knew he was coming. Right? They knew he was coming. They had been told, they had been warned, they had heard the signs. But they weren't prepared. We need to search ourselves to make sure that we are prepared. That we are ready at any moment. Right? Because there's going to be a time when, we can't anymore. We can't just sit on the sidelines forever. I remember when I was younger, in our youth group, we watched a video of people who, the skit was people had passed away, and it was a group of friends in a car, and the car had, got smashed by a truck or something, but they all died, and one of them was a Christian, and the other ones each had their thing, and the three that weren't looked at and said, "Why didn't you tell us before it was too late?" Right? You see, there's a world out there who doesn't necessarily realize that he's coming, that there's a time for it, and we got to give them the chance so that they can do it right now. Daniel and I, we like to watch this show called Forged with Fire, and in it, the contestants, they're competing for this great $1,000, $10,000 prize, something like that. In it, the contestants will actually lean over and say, "Hey, the parameters were this, and just because I don't want to beat you in such a way because you just weren't ready, because you didn't do what you were supposed to. I want our work to be tested against each other." And in this contest, they're willing to share and try to point out things before it's too late. The reality is, we're not even in a contest. But there's coming a time when it's going to be too late. So we need to share. There's this theology out there called universalism, where it just says, everybody goes. Everybody gets there. Even if you haven't decided now, you'll stand before him and decide at that point. Well, that's not what the Scripture says. The Scripture says there's going to be a point where he says the doors are closed. You don't have the oil. You weren't ready to come. You missed it. And so it is important that we are prepared. And we don't know when that time is going to be. We had it here. We don't know. We had it in Luke. We don't know. We have it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 2. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. We don't know when that's going to be. Jesus says, actually, not even the Son knows. That means Jesus actually, as he availed himself of his omnipotence, his omniscience, and his omnipresence, when he had put on that human flesh, he actually took away that knowledge from himself, put it off to the side. So even he didn't know when his return would be. Only the Father knows. Right? And so the answer is that we have to watch. We have to be ready. We have to be doing what we should be doing. We should be sharing the gospel for those who don't know better, so that they may have that opportunity. They may have that chance. Because one day that door will be shut. And so Jesus says, therefore keep watch, because you don't know the day or hour. So let's keep watch. Let's make sure. Let's check ourselves. Will you bow with me in prayer?